All right, welcome to the Krueg Show. As we get things rolling midday, Jordan Elliott, it's dinner time for him because he's in Indy for the Combine, which will be coming across your television set in the next few days on the NFL Network. John Lynch spoke yesterday at the Combine. Hope everybody's having a phenomenal Wednesday, March the 1st, as we turn the calendar from February to March. And that means we're looking at the NFL draft and the draft combine. So we get out to Indy for Jordan Elliott. Of course, you know Jordan well. He's joined us many times from Niners Nation. We are brought to you by Pig and a Pickle. The Krueg Show title sponsor is Pig and a Pickle. Check them out. They're in Corte Madera, open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. And they are also in Emeryville. And they're open Wednesday through Sunday in Emeryville, the best barbecue in the Bay Area. Pig and a Pickle. Check it out. Proud sponsors of the Krueg Show. Jordan, good to see you, man. How was the trip out to Indy? How's it going so far?
It was nice. Yeah, the unfortunate thing is the only direct flights to Indy out of the Bay Area is Red Eye out of San Francisco. So it was a rough first morning. I don't sleep well on planes, so I was up for quite a bit the first day. But I'm trying to power through and hopefully get on that East Coast time cycle a little bit.
All right. If there was a gigantic power outage in the next 5 minutes and the entire live stream was destroyed, except for what we're going to talk about right now, what would be the most I don't want to say impressive. What is the anecdote or the player connection, or what is the greatest Niner related news coming out of the first beginning of the combine? For the hardcore Niner fan who's like, I got to get my combine fixed, Jordan. What is there anything that has popped out in the last couple of days that makes you go, you know what? That's at the top of the list.
I would say just that it seems very clear that the 49ers are very unsure of how the quarterback situation is going to shake out. And I think that they're very, they still don't know how this is going to shake out going forward. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think they're looking very, very hard at bringing in a veteran. I think there are some guys who are available who, make sense if they can give them a path to a bigger role than just being the, quarterback three behind the two young guys. But, with the setback with Purdy, they still don't know what they have. It seems like with Trey Lance, we haven't seen him play enough. It just feels like they've been non-committal to either of the younger guys. And it seems just from everything you're hearing here and the way John Lynch spoke at his presser, they're very in on a veteran. And I don't think it's just going to be journeyman to hold a clipboard. I think they're looking at a guy who is a bona fide starter in the league. And I think that we're in for another long off season of having a lack of clarity surrounding the most important position in the sport, which is rather unfortunate because the rest of this roster is stacked and arguably the best in the conference. And we still don't know what's going to happen at the quarterback position all these years later. I just think it's crazy how it's shaken out.
Well, let's start right there. Do you think we're talking like Matt Ryan? I mean, are we talking Marcus Mariota? Are we talking, you got a young veteran? Are we talking about somebody playing out the string like a Ryan? I was so unimpressed by Matt Ryan this last year, but he also doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would want to come to any situation to be the number 3 quarterback. Do you think they're trying to get a number 3 quarterback, or are they really trying to hunt for a number 2 quarterback to give themselves flexibility so they can go in a number of different directions with the other guys?
I think it all just comes down to financial flexibility, which is why I think a guy like Matt Ryan does make sense, because I don't think he's really in a spot where he can come in with the salary demands of a guy, like Derek Carr is kind of the big commodity right now. That's a free agent that's widely available where you don't have to give up the draft capital. He's going to be on the open market. Derek Carr is obviously much younger and coming off of a much better season. So a guy like that, I don't think makes sense for the 49ers. But with a guy like Matt Ryan, there's obviously the connection to Shanahan. He's a bit older. And I think it just gets to a point where it's you don't need the guy to come in and carry the offense, right? He doesn't have to be the MVP he was the year that they went to the Super Bowl in Atlanta. But even with the way he's, might have struggled last year or the way it looked, how hard would it be to envision him doing kind of what Brock Purdy did or what we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo do for stretches where it's just, take care of the football, execute some of these wide open throws that you're going to get schemed up and, allow the defensive running game to really be the engine of this team. I spent considerable time with somebody who covers the Colts here in Indianapolis, and they were telling me that they thought Matt Ryan looked really good actually before. I forget if it was week 7 or week 8, but he had a pretty bad shoulder injury when he got hit. And he said that was kind of where he thought a lot of the issues towards the back end of the season stemmed from. He never thought that he quite got right from that injury. So that obviously plays into, what it's like now. Obviously, I don't have the medical, so I can't tell you if he's healthy now or if that's something that's been fixed. But he didn't think it was like a massive drop off in skill. He didn't think it was a big regression from Matt Ryan in a way that can't be fixed. He just thought the first few weeks of the season, the Colts have had issues for years now because they've had so many new quarterbacks come in year after year that he kind of attributed the slow start to that. He did mention that the offensive line play wasn't where they needed it to be or wanted it to be. And he thought that Matt Ryan kind of got kind of a raw deal coming and then getting hurt and not really being able to be the player that they envisioned him being when he came. So I still think if there's hope that he can be that guy and just be somebody who can manage football games and already has familiarity with Kyle's terminology and what he expects from the position, if you get a healthy Matt Ryan and you put him on that same roster last year, like, I'm not saying they for sure win the Super Bowl, but I think that they have a puncher's chance against Kansas City and Philadelphia. And at this point, like, that's all you can really ask for with this roster is just having somebody who gives you that opportunity. So I think Matt Ryan makes a ton of sense if he's healthy enough to do it.
That's interesting. 12 games this last year for Matt Ryan. The Colts went 4-7-1 in those 12 games. They had the one tie, 14 touchdowns, 13 picks. He is 37 at this point. What do you think he would command salary-wise?
That's tough. I feel like with Ryan, it would have to be, and I admittedly, I'm not great with the salary projection stuff, but it would have to be some kind of incentive laden deal. I don't think the Niners are going to throw a ton of guaranteed money at him, but I could see something similar to what the deal they gave with Jimmy last year, where it was kind of that per game bonus, where if you're out there and you're playing, you're getting, a substantial raise on top of the base salary that you're guaranteed to get. And I think that would make a ton of sense because then if you are in a position where, you're not completely bought in on Trey Lance, which, again, I can't confidently say they aren't, but it just feels like they're sidestepping any vote of confidence in him at this point. And with Brock Purdy, he still has the elbow inflammation. His surgery timeline's getting pushed back. If you get a scenario where Matt Ryan comes into camp, he's healthy and he's doing a lot of the things we saw Purdy doing and just being effective at distributing the football and getting the ball into the hands of McCaffrey and Kittle and Debo and Ayuk and all these great playmakers. I think if you could get him for around the same deal they gave Jimmy last year, I think that would be a great value, and I think they're a contender right away.
And do you think that would be to be the number 3 guy, or do you think that there's a chance that they would move off of one of their guys? I mean, the only reason I bring this up is just I got to ask you about John Lynch's comments about the quarterbacks yesterday. I mean, he talked about Jimmy Garoppolo, said a lot of nice things about him, and then said it's probably run its course, meaning bye-bye Jimmy. Then he went to Purdy, and he sounded very much like Purdy's the number 1 quarterback, and then basically said, hey, we're doing prayers, that he'll be back, and talked about a variety of timelines, but they seem like I don't know, maybe I'm just reading it into something that it's not there, but it seems like to me that they're kind of saying that he's their number 1 guy. Then when it came to Trey Lance, Lynch said he's got to play. That's the biggest challenge. We have a team that's ready to go now. What was your assessment of that? I mean, should we analyze that? Is it worth analyzing? What did you take away from that? Because I thought that was a golden opportunity to say, hey, we really like Trey and we can't wait to see him on the field. And he's very much a part of our future and, this and that. And it's like, he's got to play. That's the biggest challenge. That almost sounds like what the Warriors were saying about James Wiseman 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. Like, to be honest, just the way the season played out and the way that the guys in the locker room have spoken about him. I wrote something for Niners Nation a few weeks ago about, kind of when they had that belief in Purdy from some of the, star players on the team. I think that the writing was on the wall that he was going to be the guy going forward. And the only thing that's really complicated that is the fact that he did get hurt. And at this point, like, Trey Lance does need to play, and it feels like there's a reluctancy to fully commit to him. And you'd think for a team that moved the amount of capital they did to acquire him, they would be jumping at the opportunity where he's in a couple of weeks going to be the only healthy quarterback, on the roster with the starting experience on the team. And just like you said, like, it felt like they kind of avoided a great opportunity to put that vote of confidence out there. And it's felt like, just reading between the lines, there hasn't been that confidence. in him. And, I can't say why that may exist, but I agree with you. It feels like they're very much in this mode where their best case scenario is that this recovery for Purdy is ramped up and sped up and he can get back in time for camp, get some reps and be the starter week 1. And, it's hard to argue with the results they had with Purdy under center, but what does that mean for the guy that you moved all this capital for? And you talk about Trey Lance having to play. Well, if he's not going to play for the 49ers, like, do you end up doing something like the Warriors had to do where you basically, I hate to say, like, cut your losses and move him for whatever you can get. And at the other, side of the coin, like, if I'm Trey Lance, like, you went out there, you unfortunately got injured, you missed your second year, you're entering year 3. Like, if I'm him, I want, development, and it's not his fault that he got hurt and he had to miss time. And I don't think it's, I don't want to say fair. I don't know if fair is the right word, Larry, but I think at a certain point, like, if there isn't going to be that commitment to him, I do think it would be fair to explore other options if you aren't ready to make that commitment. The only thing that makes me pause from really, like, hammering home that, feeling is that it is February, and maybe he does heal up. Maybe he does come into OTAs. He wows them. They talk about wanting to see a different quarterback when he comes in, which I thought was a pretty telling statement as well. And I think Trey Lance is the kind of guy where he will embrace that challenge head on. I don't think he's going to be the kind of person, that shies away from that. So there's plenty of time for this to shake out differently. But I do think it is noteworthy that there does seem to be a lack of confidence there.
Now you're an Indy, and you got others that we all know there with you, guys like Kyle Posey, Brad Graham, and others. I'm sure Lynch's presser and what he said about the quarterbacks had to be a discussion point at the Airbnb. What are some of the other guys saying? I mean, I don't want to, you necessarily to speak for them, but you get a sense of, I mean, I got great respect for both those guys. And I would, if I were sitting in there, I'd be asking them what they thought of it. What kinds of thoughts were Brad and Kyle sharing on Lynch's assessment of the quarterbacks and specifically Trey?
I think we just kind of were all in the same boat of, like, why does there appear to be this lack of confidence, and why isn't there this willingness to make that commitment? Because, again, like, I don't want to speak for them, but that was kind of our discussion. That's where the discussion point started, was like, it felt very non-committal, and it felt very, like, just kind of sidestepping the, ability to have that. Because realistically, somebody could have asked, I thought about asking it, but if you say, hey, John, like, who's the starting quarterback right now? It's February. You're going to get some cookie cutter politically, correct response. You're not going to get anything of value out of that. So it's kind of ultimately on him to come out and say that, right? Like, it's kind of, that has to be offered up, because it's something that's very easy to sidestep. And I think John Lynch is very good at his job for a number of reasons, but one thing I think he's mastered is the ability to answer questions eloquently and politely without giving any kind of real response to the question at hand. And it feels like any questions about quarterbacks at this point are just going to get this vague, answer where you're getting something, but you're really leaving with nothing, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what it just felt like with that whole press conference, where it's like, it's clear they're going to be in the market for a quarterback, but what does that mean? And when somebody did follow up on that, I was like, okay, well, what does that mean when you're looking at that? And he just said all options are on the table. So again, he answered the question, but you get this response where it's open-ended. And I hate to say that, it feels like time's the only thing that's really going to solve this, because I think they're just waiting to see how the pieces move. And I don't know if they have the capital to do it. I don't know if the guy's going to want to continue to play football, but one thing that's very clear, and you're hearing here every single day, is that Green Bay seems to be just completely done with Rodgers. And I think they might be getting to the point where they're not going to be, hell-bent on shipping him to an AFC team. Like, they might be so content to get him out of there and get draft capital back. To me, it makes all the sense in the world for the Niners to make a push to get the guy if they can, get a commitment that he's going to play football for the next couple of years. And I do wonder if there is a move like that they're kind of working on behind the scenes before they come out and make a statement, because I think it's very easy to be like this non-committal. You're not having a, statement that's going to be put on a graphic and everybody's going to, talk about, and it's going to be this big buzz. That looks a lot worse if you were to make a move like that. Whereas if you continue to do what they're doing and then something like that materializes, it's much easier to pivot onto that. So again, I haven't heard anything at all. I want to make it very clear. I haven't heard anything at all that the Niners are making a move for him or trying to make a move for him. But I was shocked at some of the stuff I was hearing from people who cover the Packers, where they're like, no, like, this relationship it's done. And, Goody was at the podium yesterday, and he was right away was like, we're non-committal going into next year. Like, it seems like that relationship has run its course. And I wonder if Aaron Rodgers comes out of this, self-reflection period, and
The
maybe
cleanse.
the cleanse, yeah, and
Right.
full circle, it would be quite the journey, to after all these years and wanting to, prove San Francisco wrong for, not drafting you all those years later, to come to a team that's clearly ready to win now. And he knows it better than anybody. They've stopped him how many times in the playoffs? It makes all the sense in the world there. I don't know how feasible it is to get it done, but if you're not going to commit to Trey Lance, you don't have a clear timetable on Brock Purdy, go get the guy who's a 4-time MVP. You can plug it right now, and you'd probably be the odds-on favorite to win the Super Bowl next year. But
Very
again,
interesting. Very interesting stuff. A lot of meat on the bone there. Rodgers was just at Pebble Beach, and he said, "Where are you playing? Where are you playing?" He's like, "Not playing in San Fran." Then he hit a beautiful drive too. So he wasn't too distracted by it. So he's kind of come out and said he's not going to the 49ers. That is interesting. Let me throw this one to you. If Gutekunst, hard to say, by the way, called John Lynch and said, "We'll give you Aaron Rodgers for Trey Lance," would Lynch do it straight up? Who would win that trade? You got Rodgers, who's clearly the better quarterback, Hall of Famer, but you also have Rodgers at the very end, and you got Trey, who's got, in some ways, that's the ideal spot for Trey Lance to be, is competing with Jordan Love, 90 miles or whatever it is away from Marshall, Minnesota, and, right there in his backyard with a really established, solid franchise. If the Niners won the ring, there would be no regrets. But if Trey goes to Green Bay and becomes Mahomes, man, I don't know. That could be pretty ugly. What do you think of that idea? And what do you think you would say if you were Lynch getting that offer?
If I was Lynch, I would do it because, like I said, it feels like at this point, for whatever reason, there's a reluctance to fully back Trey Lance as the guy going forward. It felt like, I wonder how last offseason would have shaken out if Jimmy didn't get that shoulder surgery. I wonder if it would have been all the stuff about it's Trey's team, Trey's the guy going forward. If Jimmy doesn't get that surgery, I do wonder how committed the 49ers are. Because at a certain point, like, the words are great, but the actions will always speak louder than words. And it feels like with their actions, Larry, like, there's a reluctance to make that long-term commitment. And, a lot of people are out on Rodgers because he's old, or he's doing his, cleanses and his, nature journeys or whatever, whatever's going on in his life right now. At the end of the day, he's one of the most talented throwers of the football we've ever seen in the NFL. He was an MVP just 1 year ago, and he's somebody who, again, would come in right away and make the 49ers a contender. And I think at this point, the way I'd look at it, Larry, is, if you only get Rodgers for 2 years, realistically, if we look 3 years out, the 49ers have shown that they can restock the cupboard and they can, continue to bring in young talent. But how long are you going to be able to keep open this window where you have guys like, Fred Warner and George Kittle and, Debo in their primes? Like, to me, they're on this kind of, it's very similar to the Warriors timeline where it's like you have these players who are these, some I would say are generational talents, and you're in this win now window, but you're also trying to develop the guy who needs reps, who needs the growing pains, who needs the ability to get out there. Like, I spoke last year to RG3. He was here in Indianapolis, and he was a young quarterback that was drafted high in the Shanahan offense. And I asked him, you've been in those shoes before. What do you think Trey Lance needs to succeed? He's like, he needs to be able to go out there and make mistakes. And it's really hard to do that when you're on a team that has the expectation of winning now and has the expectation of, being able to get to the areas they've reached with Jimmy and with Brock Purdy last year. Like, there's the expectation that, hey, if we have a healthy quarterback, we're going to be in the mix for a conference championship. We're going to be in the mix for a Super Bowl. And I think ultimately, like, it's unfair to a young quarterback who needs those reps to not grant them the opportunity to make the mistakes that they need to make to become a good quarterback. Like, Mahomes is probably, I don't think we'll ever see anything like Mahomes ever again, Larry, not just from the talent standpoint, but from the fact that he came in his first full year starting and had one of the best passing seasons we've ever seen. Like, realistically, these guys are going to need time. You're going to need more of that kind of Josh Allen timeline. And Trey Lance hasn't been able to get that. And I struggle to see now, 3 years into it, where the 49ers are like, all right, well, let's just reset and give the guy a few years. And we're going to, you don't want to say waste because that's not the right word, but jeopardize the window that you have with all these star-studded guys. Like, how many more years does Trent Williams have left in the tank? He's one of the best left tackles of all time. is he a guy that's going to want to be out there if the 49ers aren't pushing all in to win right now and they're on this, kind of half in committing to win and half in where we need to develop this young quarterback we have who's still super raw. And it comes back on the organization to me where it's like the window never really added up. And now we're in year 3 and it looks even worse than it did from day one.
So many interesting layers to this thing. If there were a trade on the table of Trey Lance and Aaron Rodgers, do you think just try to back away from it? Don't have you work for Niners Nation. You don't work for Packers Nation. So, I'm not saying you're a Niner honk because I think you're really independent thinker. But like me, I'm a lifelong Niner fan. I have a hard time seeing it through Packers lenses and Niners lenses. That all being said, is it a fair deal? I mean, I'll say this. The one thing, if I'm John Lynch, is that you can say to your fans, we're going for the championship, which speaks really loudly. But, and that in a lot of ways is the bottom line. And then you could also look at Trey and in Trey's parents in the eye and say, hey, it didn't work out here, but we hand delivered you to a great opportunity. And maybe they would be okay with that. The ability to compete in Green Bay with Jordan Love for the starting job. Maybe that's a better situation. Do you think it's a fair deal, or do you think that one side or the other would have to add something to the deal to make it fair?
One for one, no, I don't think it would be. I think the Niners would have to add more. Honestly, I would even get to the point where it's like I hate parting with draft capital, especially around this time as somebody who, writes content about the team and needs things to talk about leading up to the draft. But I think you're like offering the 2024 first would be more valuable than, Trey Lance on his own at this point. And I think that if you remember, there was the report before the 2021 draft when they had already moved up to that third pick that they had reached out apparently to Green Bay and tried to get Rodgers for that third pick. And I wonder if those discussions are a little bit different if instead of just the third pick, it's the 2 firsts and the third that they had shipped to Miami, because to me, that's far more valuable. You diversify a little bit. You get picks in multiple drafts. Maybe Green Bay wasn't super high on the guys in the top end of that draft, so that third pick didn't hold as much weight for them as it may have for other teams. It feels like to me, Larry, what happened was they wanted a guy like Rodgers from the beginning. It sounded like they wanted Deshaun Watson before the off the field stuff came to the surface and, kind of remove that possibility. It was reported that they wanted Matt Stafford too before they lost out to him going to LA. So it feels like what happened was they wanted that veteran guy from the beginning. That didn't happen. So they pivoted. They turned to a rookie that they liked, that they thought could come in and start right away. Didn't happen, unfortunately. And I just wonder if they get to a point where they're like, we need to pivot back to the veteran guy that we wanted from the beginning. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is a very unique situation. He's a very unique player. But if that's the guy that you can get, I think you pay the premium to get him because you know what he's capable of doing. And like you said, I think it speaks volumes when you go all in for a guy like that, because the alternative could be too, hey, you keep the guys you have now. This roster ages out in a few years. They never get that Super Bowl that you're chasing, and you're kind of stuck in the same spot where you're going to have to rebuild this thing from the ground up. NFL, not for long, right? How long is this window going to be open? And I think at this point, you have to maximize it any way you can. And if you aren't ready to commit to Trey Lance being that guy, it's unfair to him and it's unfair to the fans. And it's unfair to everybody else if you just kind of keep waffling about what to do with that position going forward.
Such an interesting discussion. Scotch says neither Trey nor Purdy can beat Mahomes or Reed in the Super Bowl right now. How much does that play into the mix? I mean, as you kind of referenced, the window doesn't last forever. I would say the 49ers have a 2-year window, maybe a 3-year window on their core, Bosa, Kittle, Debo, Trent, whatever you want to define as their core. I would say it's probably a 2 to 3 year window. These windows are really short in the NFL because the careers are relatively short. This is interesting. Do you think that the 49ers fear that Brock could be just maybe regress a little bit because of the elbow, and that Trey could improve, but maybe not improve to the level where he totally takes the job, and that they're very similar, and that they could have a split locker room with half the guys saying, hey man, Trey's the guy, and the other half saying, hey man, we went 12-1 or whatever it was with Brock Purdy, or 7-1 or whatever. Do you think they fear a Trey Brock splitting of their locker room? I know they're both great guys. I know they would never intentionally, do anything bad to one another. But do you think they're just fearful that organically could come about?
I think they have to be, absolutely, right. And I think, again, that's something that doesn't reflect or is not an indictment on Trey Lance. I think what's happened is he came into a situation where there was already a ton of loyalty in that locker room to Jimmy Garoppolo because of the respect his teammates had for him. They won a ton of games with him. And then you have the situation this past year with Purdy where, two quarterbacks go down, the 7th-round rookie steps in, he leads them to a, division-clinching win in Seattle. He beats Tom Brady 35-0 in his first start. You go in and beat a team like Seattle at home, you beat the Cowboys at home, and you go into Philadelphia feeling confident that with this guy, you could win. So even John Schneider, when I talked to John Schneider yesterday here, John Schneider was like, hey, if Purdy doesn't get hurt, who knows what happens, that's even
right.
Rival general managers are like, hey, this guy was good enough to take this team to where they wanted to get to. So I think it's more so just an unfortunate result of the circumstance where it's like Trey Lance hasn't gotten that opportunity to earn the organic loyalty that comes with just winning a ton of football games, which is going to be the end all cure all of any kind of, drama in the locker room or any tension or any of that usually is absolved with winning. And Brock Purdy had that large sample size where he was able to do that. Trey Lance hasn't. And it doesn't mean he can't, and it doesn't mean he won't. It just means that it's really hard to sell guys on like, well, you've won with this guy. You might win with this guy. And I think that's where there's an issue that arises because just like you said, like these guys know their windows aren't forever. Trent Williams just got done saying, hey, this is a grueling season. I don't know how many more of these I have left in me. And you can't take for granted the greatness that you've, accumulated on this roster. You've put together such a great foundation and you can't jeopardize there being that disconnect because you're not ready to be in a position to make them feel like they have the best shot at winning week after week after week.
So interesting. When I heard John Lynch talk about Trey Lance and he came out and he said, he's got to play and that's the biggest challenge. And we have a team that's ready to go. And then he went on and on about how he loves him as a person. To me, it just ding, 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 ding. It sounds like he's prepping for a trade. Like, hey, we don't need to trade this guy. We think the world of him, but he just has to play. And we're ready to win now. And basically, if he had replaced what he said and just said, our timeline and Trey's timeline don't really jive, that would have been kind of the same comment. He didn't necessarily say that. But you and I before, and then I mentioned that way, to me, that sounds like he's preparing to trade Trey Lance. And then my other comment was, I think that the number 2 or the number 3 quarterback that they bring in, if it's truly the kind of player that could easily be a number 2 quarterback, then maybe there is something to they're going to trade Trey Lance. Because otherwise, if they bring in a third quarterback who's a true third quarterback, then Brock's your 1 and Trey's your 2, or they compete for the 1 and the third guy's the third guy. But if they bring in Matt Ryan, if they bring in Marcus Mariota, if they bring in somebody like that, or even somebody with a future as a starter, to me, that's an indication that they may trade Trey. The other thing that was interesting, and you and I talked before we got on here, was that your comment to me was, man, it's really interesting looking around the NFL, and you got ex-Niner, compadres and lieutenants everywhere. Rand Carthon's the new GM in Tennessee. Martin Mayhew's in Washington, right? Is he in Washington?
Mm-hmm.
D'Amico Ryans is in Houston. Robert Saleh's with the Jets. You can make an argument that every single one of those teams either could or should be looking for a quarterback. Do you think that if they did somehow acquire Rodgers, do you think Trey would be involved in that deal, or do you think it would be a draft pick deal and Trey may get shuffled off to one of these other Niner guys? I mean, like if I'm Rand Carthon, I would much rather have Trey Lance than Malik Willis or Ryan Tannehill. If I'm Martin Mayhew, I'd much rather have Trey Lance than taking a roll of the dice in the draft. If I'm D'Amico, I'd rather have Trey Lance than Davis Mills. If I'm Saleh, I'd rather have D'Amico than Zach Wilson. Where what's your read on that with all these ex-Niner people who were, there and kind of know Trey personally, may have a personal relationship with him? All it takes is one guy to say, you know what, that kid's got something. And all of a sudden you got a deal made. Or do you think this Rodgers thing could be a Rodgers for Trey? Or do you think it could be Rodgers and then Trey goes somewhere else? Because
I think
Green Bay does have Jordan Love, and you could make an argument that they're happy with him. He played pretty well at times this year.
I would say it would have to be the latter, Larry, just for that reason, because I don't know what we've seen from Trey Lance that you would, if you're Green Bay, feel like this guy's going to come in and be better than Jordan Love right away, or be better than Jordan Love in the long term, because they feel great about the jump that Jordan Love's made during the past season, which is why I think there is so much of a willingness to move on from a guy like Aaron Rodgers. That wouldn't be there, even with all the drama, all that extra headache. If they didn't feel great about Jordan Love, I don't think they would be so open about their willingness to move on. And I don't know, how much value they see in Trey Lance if he's not going to be a guy that has a clear role to starting. My only concern would be kind of with the other part is, if the 49ers kind of don't have that, commitment and they are willing to trade a guy like that, what's stopping some of the other guys who were in the building with him from feeling similarly, or feeling like they have some knowledge as to why maybe things haven't worked out the way they had hoped when they moved up and made that trade. So, I think it all depends on who values what, because as like everybody has different values of different players. Everybody sees players differently. Scheme fits matter. So maybe a guy like Grant Carthen does like Trey Lance. He does believe in him, and he was a big part of, the scouting process to bring him in. So it's certainly on the table, but I just think that ultimately the issue right now is because the sample size is so small, and because we're 2 years removed from the draft where he was selected top 5 and he's a highly touted prospect, you're basically selling him at his lowest value if you do sell him. And I think the only way you could do that comfortably is if you did have a guy like Aaron Rodgers come in, and you did have a guy that was a proven commodity where you're like, all right, this guy's the starter. We're not going to be rushed into, bringing Purdy back if his elbow is not going to be healed up in time. He's not going to have to miss the whole offseason, because that's another thing. If they rush to get Purdy back week 1, him missing the entire offseason of throwing with his receivers and having training camp to ramp up, like that's a big deal. That's a huge, part of the equation. So if you do move a guy like Trey Lance, you basically would have to accept that you're eating a loss. And the only reason that you're comfortable eating that loss is because you feel like you have a net gain by bringing in a player like Aaron Rodgers, or something like that were to happen. I just don't think it would be, a swap where they'd be involved. I think you basically have to send draft capital to Green Bay, which they might feel reluctant doing given they haven't had a first the last 2 years. And, maybe ship Trey off for whatever you can get, and then package that as well. But it would have to be, it's not the NBA. If it was the NBA, it's like, you can work out a nice 3-team trade, figure something out. But you basically have to do that without the formality of an actual 3-team trade there. I just don't, I don't see how they could move off of him unless they have a concrete option elsewhere where, again, the gain of that, player coming in is going to offset the loss of losing Trey Lance at a value. It'd be really hard to get good value, I feel like, at this point. Why? Like, other teams would have all the leverage and, those kind of trade talks. Like, so I just don't see how they could get something good back in return.
The only thing that would make you think that they might be able to get something decent in return is just the old economics 1A, first chapter, which was the laws of supply and demand, right? Mm-hmm. There's a greater demand for starting NFL quarterbacks than there is a supply. And if somebody felt like Trey was a starter, then maybe you could get something. You're not getting what you paid, but maybe you could get something more approaching, a third of what you paid. Clarsard says Rodgers is an herbalist. He could play another 2 to 3 years. Rodgers wasn't great this year. He clearly showed some regression. How much do you think he's got left? Honestly,
I think he could be fine over the next couple of seasons. I there was a couple of games that I went back and watched just for my own, perspective on things. And I think he still has it. I think he still has the ability to make plays out of structure. He still has the ability to place the ball with touchdown field, arguably better than anybody else in the league. Maybe consistency was a problem, but I think a lot of that has to do with, if all these reports we're hearing now are there, I don't think that's something that just happened overnight. There probably was this disconnect throughout the season. The Packers got just demolished with injuries too. I think that played a big role in it. Was, and they had a few weeks where they kind of were still clawing back. They looked like they might be a playoff team, but there was so much going on outside of Rodgers' own regression that I think maybe there was a little bit of a mental checkout there. And I just think that, again, the way the 49ers are set up right now, it feels like we look every year at them and it's like, man, if you just plugged in an above average starting quarterback, this is one of the most, dangerous teams we've seen in a decade. Like, it's not even just one of the best teams in the league now. Like, this team is stacked top to bottom. The only thing holding them back is the fact they don't have that, top end talent at quarterback. So I think Rodgers still is a guy that has the ability to be that above average starter. He may not be the best quarterback in the league. His MVP days are probably over at this point, but Shanahan does so much of the leg lifting in this offense, right? Like, he does so much of the, the work to get these guys open. And I just feel like Rodgers is so far away from being at a point where I'm like, I don't feel confident he can hit these guys, go through his progressions, do the things that he needs to do. And I think as long as they're winning football games, I don't think there's going to be this butting of heads that I always see floated around when, you talk about Kyle and Aaron hypothetically. I think winning cures everything. And I think at this point, it's almost like both need each other. Like, Kyle hasn't been able to get over the hump because he hasn't had his quarterback. Rodgers hasn't been able to get there because he hasn't had the defense. He hasn't really had the, head coach to kind of get him there since McCarthy, and they did it, when was it, 13 years ago? So it's kind of like poetic in a way, right? Like, they kind of like need one another, which is why, even though the possibility is very slim, and I understand that, and it's probably not going to happen, if we're just talking about paper, on paper hypotheticals, it makes all the sense in the world for both if they were willing to work it out and able to work out a deal. So, I'd be fully in. I still think he's a great player. I still think he's one of the, 7 or 8 best quarterbacks in the league on any given day.
A few more minutes with Jordan Elliott from Indianapolis, the site of the NFL draft combine, which you can see on the NFL Network over the next few days. It's March 1st, 2023. We've seen Trey in camp. We've seen him play in some regular season games. It's a very small sample size. I'm on record as saying that I really believe in Trey Lance, and I think he's going to be good eventually, but that I would move him because I don't think his timeline and the Niner timeline jives. I don't see the patience for the development curve that he's going to undergo. So I would entertain trades for Trey for that reason, but I wouldn't give him away. That all being said, what's your evaluation? You watch a lot of film, football as well as almost anybody I have on this show. What do you think? I mean, what is Trey Lance's future in your opinion today?
It's so hard because I think that as of now, like, there's not enough to go off of for me to have a strong opinion one way or the other. But I do agree with you. I think the long-term outlook is much more optimistic because I think he is somebody where you hear about the work ethic he has. You hear about his ability to process information, absorb the playbook, do all the things that you need to do that, outside of being on the field that make quarterbacks great, that typically takes a lot of time. Like, it's like a lot of the things that take quarterbacks years to develop, he's able to come in and do right away. So a lot of the hard stuff is taken care of. It's just a matter of kind of getting those game speed reps and getting the things that you're never going to be able to replicate in a practice environment or an off-season workout. And I'm just kind of in line with you. I just think that, I wouldn't give him away, like you said. I wouldn't, actively advertise I'm shopping him. But if one of those former 49ers front office people or one of, another team around the league that really coveted him, that maybe misses out on one of the quarterbacks in this class or doesn't really get blown away by one, came calling and they offered something that, would replenish the draft capital the Niners lost with the trade to get Trey Lance and then the trade to get McCaffrey, I would have to entertain it because I'm with you. I just don't think that they're in a position where they're going to give the guy the reps that he needs to get unless their hand is forced and they have to due to injury or they have to due to them missing out on a free agent. And it's going to be like, oh, we believed in them all along. Well, if you did, why aren't you saying it now in February? But that's something you're going to hear maybe in like July or August when Purdy's timeline's pushed back, or maybe they couldn't get a Mariota or an Andy Dalton or somebody like that. And then you start getting we love Trey. This is his team. We believe in him. If you're not ready to say that now, then you have to explore other options. And I just think that in anything in life, if you're that non-committal with something that's that imperative to the success of your operation, ultimately it's going to be very difficult to succeed. And I think that the 49ers succeeding the way that they have, in spite of that, they obviously haven't won the Super Bowl, but making the NFC Championship in each of the last 2 years with that kind of, I don't know if dysfunction is the right word, Larry, but kind of the drama with the quarterback position, I think is pretty astounding. And I don't think that's something that you can replicate year after year after year. And they just need to have a definitive plan for the next 5 years. And if you're not going to give them the time to develop, let them do that elsewhere and get back the draft capital.
Incredible stuff. Before we let you go, you're there to watch the players, talk to some of the players. What is the 49ers' primary need? Is it offensive tackle? Is it defensive tackle? The way I look at the free agent market, I think McGlinchey's gone. Um, Tayshaun Gibson had a nice season, but is he coming back at safety? Is Jimmy Ward coming back? Is Aziz coming back? Is Emmanuel Mosley coming back? There's a lot of questions. They got about 7 different defensive linemen that are free agents, so there's going to be some turnover there for sure. Are you hearing the Niners connected to any individuals? It's still very early in the process, but where do you, and there's a lot of questions there, but where is the primary need for the 49ers, and are you hearing them connected in any way, shape, or form to any of the prospects?
So I can say definitively today they did meet with a couple of defensive line prospects. Those were the guys that this was the first day that we got to speak with prospects, and defensive line was the group that came out today. So they definitely are in contact with defensive line prospects in this draft. I think they're going to be every year. That's, kind of been their recipe for success. There are some really, really nice athletes that are in this draft class. So I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on. I would say their biggest need, and especially in this draft, is defensive back. I think they need a corner and they need a safety. It sounds like Tayshaun Gibson and the Niners have some mutual interest with him coming back. He was great for them last season.
Yeah,
but he also, if you're having those kind of discussions and you're at that age, you have to start planning for the long term, because if you're able to bring Gibson back next year, that's fantastic. But I think the Niners have done a great job of having guys like redshirt almost, where you draft a guy and then you have them start the second year. They get that year under their belt without being thrown into the fire right away. I think if they could do that at the safety spot, it would be tremendous for them. And then you could pair whoever they draft with Huff for the long term going forward. And then you have a young, dynamic pairing at your safety spot on the back end, both on rookie deals. I would love to see Emmanuel Mosley come back. I don't know what the medical situation is or how comfortable the Niners are paying him. So I do think it would be wise to invest in corners. And, Diamador Lenore, you look at a guy like him, like he played great to finish the year last year. After he got some reps under his belt, he had some time in the league. I think if they're able to just keep hitting those positions of extreme value, edge rushers, corners, I think they could use a couple receivers, to be honest, too, just guys that you can keep developing behind the scenes, especially when you talk about the late round picks. I talked to Martin Mayhew today and I asked him, what was something that during your time with the 49ers kind of stood out about the way that you guys were able to hit on so many late round picks? And the gist of what he said was pretty much, we knew what we wanted with the value we were going to get. And we had a very specific player type we were looking for. So if this guy was able to check the boxes that we wanted, even if they weren't the first guy on our board, you build this big board, you have all these prospects, they were very keen on going after guys with a very specific skill set at a very specific position. And I think that they'd be wise to continue loading up on those guys, because realistically, it's really hard to hit on draft picks, right, Larry? And you're not going to have that same success the later you get into the draft year after year. But I think if they're able to keep stocking up on young players that they can develop kind of behind the scenes, like I think next year, I know we talked a ton at camp about McCrary Ball. I think he's a guy who's in line for a big role going forward, and he didn't see the field, this year. Like he's a guy that you keep getting guys like that. That's when you get into a position where you're able to absorb these losses. You're going to have your free agents getting paid by other teams. And I think that they don't need to draft for need immediately, meaning like getting a guy starting day one in 2023. I don't think you're going to find that value with where they'll be picking, but I do think they can get some developmental prospects that they can kind of mold into those roles in the next few seasons.
Give me last question, and we appreciate your time. Give me one guy that you're either looking at, can be looking closely at, heard rumblings about. My one guy is the Michigan defensive tackle, Mozzie Smith. I think it's Maisie. He's 6'3", he's 326 pounds. To me, they badly need to find a replacement for Kinlaw. I don't think you're going to be able to do it in free agency. I like Poona Ford, and I know Kyle Posey wrote a nice piece saying Poona Ford, and I would go that direction. But, if they had to go into the draft, this guy from Michigan is absolutely incredible. Supposedly he did 22 reps of 325, not 225. Now, a lot of people feel that he close grip benched 550 on campus. He's got a 44-inch vertical, broad jump 9 feet plus, almost 9.5 feet. He had 37 tackles last year. They clocked him at 4.41 in the shuttle, and his 6.95 cone that he did at Michigan would have been the fastest among defensive tackles in Indy last year. The fastest was 7.33 among the defensive tackles. This guy was at 6.95. To me, they got to find a Kinlaw replacement, and I think it's in the draft. That's the guy whose workout I'm going to be looking at. Is there somebody that you're looking for this week that you're like, hey, you know what? I cannot wait to see this particular group, either position players or individual, this week in Indy? Is there, what are you looking forward to?
Absolutely, yeah. For me, it's the edge rusher, Tavius Robinson out of Ole Miss. He's 6'6", 265. He looks like a guy who has good bend, has good size. And I think just he's somebody, if he tests the way it sounds like he will, I think he's somebody that could be in that range for the 49ers with those picks they have. They might have the ability to move up. They have 3 consecutive picks at the back end of the 3rd round. And I think if you just keep giving guys like that to Chris Kocurek and Darryl Tapp, and we've seen the results that you can get out of it. And I think you should draft edge rushers every single year. You can never have too many of them. And we just saw this past year with Drake Jackson, they can make an impact right away, but you also can get by without them being a, every down player right away. And I think if you can keep that kind of, year after year trend of having a guy waiting in the wings that you've developed, that, you just keep it kind of going, you don't get in a position where you're having to overpay for a position where there's very few impact players. I don't say very few impact players. There's very few, like, just truly elite players.
Difference
and what happens
makers,
is a lot of difference makers. Exactly. And there's a lot of guys who hit free agency who get paid like difference makers who aren't. And I'd much rather see the 49ers just year after year continue to draft these guys who are super athletic and rely on the expertise of guys like Kocurek and Darryl Tapp and just the way that they've been able to get that success out of that possession group. So I think that, at the end of the day, that's a position that I'm always going to watch closely with the 49ers. But I admittedly have to do a little bit more homework on some of the tackles who are here. But sure. I am interested to see if the 49ers, how much interest they have at looking at one of those guys, because I don't know how they could get a guy that they come in and have start from day one. I think they caught lightning in a bottle with Spencer Burford last year being a 4th-round pick and being their starting right guard right away. And I don't know how feasible it is that they could do it right away, but maybe you are able to get a veteran stopgap. Like I wrote an article like last week, I think, about Billy Turner, who's a guy who has, familiarity with the scheme, who could maybe be a bridge to a younger guy that you could develop behind the scenes a little bit. And, they've made it pretty vocal. They're pretty confident in Colton McKivitz too. So I definitely will be watching the O-line guys. So the big guys is where I'm going to be focused on. The guy I'm really interested to see too is D Winters from TCU, who's another one of those guys where I feel like I've had 4 or 5 different, pieces of information given to us, as media, where they break down players, positions and whatnot. And half of them have him listed as linebacker, half of them have him listed as a safety. So I'm really interested to see if he's one of those guys that fits that mold of the, the Fred Warners and Flanagan Fowles and McCrary Balls, where they have that, the Dre Greenlaws, they have the expertise of playing that kind of positionless, is he a secondary guy? Is he a linebacker? The 49ers seem to love those kind of athletes, and I thought that he was fantastic in that college football playoff game against Michigan. So he's a guy that I'm definitely interested to watch as well.
Yeah, 2 guys I really can't wait to see. Kalijah Cansey from Pitt, who's 6 feet 275 and just moves incredibly well. And then I watched a lot of Iowa. They were disaster on offense, but on defense, they've got some real players. And Lucas Van Ness, who looks a little bit like a gigantic version of Bosa. He's 6'5", 275 with, a 6-pack, and he's an interior rusher. I'm looking for him. And then Riley Moss, who I think is an interesting player, who's a corner for Iowa, but I think, could transition to free safety in the NFL. Those are the guys I'll be looking for. And then you never know who's going to jump off the page at you. Jordan, awesome stuff, man. If people are picking you up in Niners Nation, did you write something today? I know you've been writing a bunch of things. If I go to Niners Nation in the next 4 or 5 days, what will I see there from you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So today I just wrote about just who they met with, a little bit brief background on each of the players, nothing too in depth, just kind of a sense of who they are, where they played, what their role was on the college team they were on. And so I'll be trying to do that every day for the meetings we get. I'm not going to obviously be able to confirm every meeting that they had with every player because they meet with so many of them, but the ones that I am able to confirm, I will definitely do my best to do that every day. I also wrote a piece about John Lynch's comments on, D'Amico Ryans and how it just kind of how he was viewed as a person and how he was viewed as a leader, the impact he had, and then talking about how he feels like Steve Wilkes is the right guy to replace him. As tough as he is to replace, he feels like Wilkes is the guy to do so. And I'll also have a piece out about Martin Mayhew's comments about how the 49ers have had so much success on the back end of the draft and how they've been hitting on these day 3 guys seemingly during the entire run of this regime. And you never know, anything else 49ers that comes up, I'll be doing my best to kind of work any angle I can and try to bring back. And it helps when it feels like a third of the league somehow has ties to this organization with all the guys that leave for different jobs all over. So it's actually been much easier than I feel like for most other teams to have something 49ers related come up with conversations with some of these people from other teams.
Well, you're the man, brother, and safe travels to you. Nothing but respect coming from here, and the chat totally respects the work that you do. Keep it rolling. Say hi to Kyle, say hi to Brad, and all the guys out there. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Larry. A pleasure. Anytime.
There you go. The great Jordan Elliott. He is awesome. And Niners Nation has done a really good job. Kyle Posey, I've been having Kyle on for the last year, and he's one of my favorite guys to talk to as well. And, I have Niners Nation bookmarked on my computer, and I check it probably 7 to 10 times a day. And I'm always kind of Googling Niners to make sure that I'm on top of the latest and greatest. That was an interesting conversation. All right. I'm going to have a couple thoughts here about our sponsors, and then I'm going to come back and get with you on the chat, read a couple more chats. Maybe we'll even take a phone call or two, but a lot of interesting stuff there. Would you trade Trey Lance if it meant that you could get Aaron Rodgers? I mean, that my takeaway from yesterday's John Lynch presser was that it sounded like very similar to what Steve Kerr and Bob Myers were saying about James Wiseman about a month ago. You know what? He's really good. We really love him. He's got to play to develop, and he can't play here. And now James Wiseman is a Piston. So what does that mean for Trey Lance's future? A lot of interesting stuff there. All right, let's first tell you that we are brought to you by Pig and a Pickle. Check them out online at pigandapickle.com. Check them out in Marin County. They're at 341 Corte Madera Town Center, right there in Corte Madera and in Marin. And they're also in the public marketplace in Emeryville. They're open Wednesday through Sunday in Emeryville. They're open 7 days a week in Marin County. They open at 11 a.m. in Marin every day. They close at 8 p.m. Don't show up at 7:30 hoping you're going to get your pick of the lot because they run out. Like all good barbecue places, they run out. The brisket, amazing. The pulled pork sandwiches, phenomenal. The baby back ribs are juicy. The chicken, the barbecue chicken is incredible. Their house-made hot links are incredible. And then the sides. I mean, my kid always goes white cheddar mac and cheese. I usually get a cup of the beef brisket chili. The collard greens are amazing. The kettle chips cooked in tallow, beef tallow, amazing. They do catering. They do craft beers, kids menu, family menu, salads, sandwiches. You can order online at pigandapickle.com. 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. in Marin County. They're open 7 days a week in Marin. Great spot. If you haven't been to Pig and a Pickle, check it out. We had somebody the other day sent me a thing on Twitter saying, hey, man, I'm in L.A. I'm watching your show all the time on YouTube, and I was up in the Bay Area, and I went to Pig and a Pickle. And that was very, very cool. And here's a little video right now from our good friends, Damon and Mary, the owners of Pig and a Pickle. Also, big thanks to Casey Bateman and the good people at Telmetrics for being a sponsor of the show today. If you're an occupational therapist, an orthopedic surgeon, a chiropractor, or a physical therapist of any kind, Telmetrics is designed for you to use in your practice. And here's a little message from Telmetrics. And thanks to Telmetrics for being a sponsor, TELMETRIX.co. And thanks to Casey Bateman. Also, special thanks to the sponsor of today's show, New York Style Italian Sausage. Man, what an awesome product that is. I love the Italian mild. We had the Italian spicy the other night for dinner, the chorizo, the breakfast sausage. It's all great stuff. And here's another word for New York style Italian sausage.
So New York style sausage was started over 70 years ago. We are the largest producer of fresh Italian sausage on the West Coast.
What makes our sausage in New York style is really the recipe came from back east, from New York, from Connecticut.
If you look at all of our labels, there's maximum 4 or 5 ingredients, which we're really proud of.
There's no preservatives, no MSG, fresh in, fresh out.
The pork comes in fresh, goes out fresh. There's never any freezing throughout the process. We've always used fine quality cuts. We're never gonna deter from that. It's one of the reasons why our sausage is so good. I guarantee you put our sausage up against anybody else's from a flavor standpoint, no one will beat it, hands down.
And do yourself a favor and do me a favor. Go buy a package of the New York style Italian sausage. Guaranteed you will love it, guaranteed.
All right, welcome back to the Krueg Show. Hope everybody's having a great Wednesday. It is March 1st. I love March. I'm a big fan of March. Why? I love baseball. I love spring training. I love the lead up to the draft and the combine and all that kind of stuff. And it's all going on right now. And then right now also is when kind of the NBA season starts to get a little bit more serious. So you got basketball getting serious. You got, baseball spring training going on. You got the NFL draft around the corner and the combine and everything that goes along with the draft. So it's my favorite month of the year, March, and we are here. We are out of February officially and into March. I did drop the call. If you want to, we can do some video calls. If somebody wants to jump in, we can take some video calls. And I put the link to the video calls in the chat. So if you want to jump in, feel free. Bomber T says, what kind of haul would it take to get Aaron Rodgers? All right. If you're just tuning in, you're saying, why are we talking about Aaron Rodgers? James Wynn says, nothing. Rodgers stinks. Well, Rodgers clearly does not stink. Aaron Rodgers is still a hell of a player. Let's take a look at Rodgers' numbers for the year. They're not great for the year. I mean, it wasn't one of his best years. He definitely regressed a little bit this year, but it wasn't significant. He still threw for 3,600 yards, almost 3,700 yards, 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. It's kind of a high interception total. He had a 91 rating. If you look at his stats for his career, he's put up some incredible stats in his career. I mean, the guy the year before had 37 touchdowns. The year before that, he had 48 touchdowns. So it was 48 touchdowns, 5 picks in 2020, 37 touchdowns, 4 picks in 2021. And this year he regressed, 26 touchdowns, only 12 picks. So he is getting up there in age. Now, if you look at his games played, this guy hasn't missed a game since 2017. So I guess the question is a couple things. There's a couple questions here. One, I'm glad that Jordan was on there and brought this up, because I took the same thing away from the John Lynch presser that it sounded like he did, which is when John came out and talked about Trey Lance and said he's got to play. That's the biggest challenge. We have a team that's ready to go. That sounds like John Lynch publicly announcing that Trey's timeline to play and their timeline don't mesh, don't jive. And so to me, it sounds like he's preparing us for the realization that Trey's going to be traded. And that's what I got out of that. Now, there's a lot of people that think I'm rooting for that. I'm not rooting for that. I'm scared to trade Trey Lance, because in my assessment, Trey Lance is going to be a very good NFL quarterback, maybe even a great NFL quarterback, and it's going to take some time. And I'm thinking 2 years, 3 years, in that range total of playing before he's really ready to win Super Bowls. But NFL quarterbacks can play sometimes 20 years. So you might have a decade of success with Trey Lance. And if you trade him to Green Bay with as solid as their organization is, and you've got Christian Watson there, his collegiate receiver, you've got Romeo Doubs there. Trey Lance could go there, and between him and Jordan Love, they could give the Packers franchise caliber quarterbacks for the foreseeable future. And Rodgers could get hurt in the first game, and you're back to Purdy, and that could be a wrap. So I don't know. I don't know that, I could see Green Bay wanting Lance, and I definitely sounds like Green Bay wants to trade Aaron. Aaron just said at Pebble Beach he's not going to San Fran. So maybe somebody in the Packer organization guaranteed him that they would never trade him to San Francisco. I don't know. I don't know what the deal is there. But, the other question is, Aaron Rodgers just had his whole immunization thing versus, and he's he's probably on the conservative side, and this is a very liberal part of the country. And how would the fans respond? And this is an opportunity. I'd love to hear, because theoretically, many of you in the chat, since I do a lot of talking about the Giants, the Warriors, and the Niners, theoretically, whether you're from the Bay Area or from around the country, if you're in my chat on this live stream, you're probably a Niner guy. So I'll throw it out to you guys. How would the Bay Area respond if what we just discussed actually came to be? If somehow either Trey Lance was traded to Green Bay or Trey Lance was traded, period, and that compensation was rerouted to Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers came here, how would people respond? Would people be like, hey, you know what? Aaron Rodgers is a franchise quarterback and he can help us win a Super Bowl. Thumbs up. Or do you say, man, he's a weirdo. He's this. He makes too much money. He's going to change our culture and our vibe and our this and our that. And I don't want to root for him. And what does he have left? And he's clearly regressing and, thumbs down. The other question that I think has to be broached is how much, where's Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch as far as Jed York and the ownership? We know that the Niners' stated goal is to win the Super Bowl. Well, they've contended for a Super Bowl, but they haven't won a Super Bowl. They've made it to the Super Bowl under this regime, but they haven't won a Super Bowl. And now they've lost the last 2 years in the NFC Championship game. Would this regime be viewed as successful if they don't win a Super Bowl? And it's a weird thing, because in a way, that's way too high of a standard for anybody, right? I mean, it's like if you have a Super Bowl or bust mentality, you're going to be kind of miserable most of the time. There's no way around that. So I don't know that the Super Bowl or bust mentality is the healthiest mentality, but looking at what Philly did this year to get to the bowl, they didn't win it. Looking what the Rams did last year to win the bowl, you got to be all in. And I mean, these are really, really, really difficult things to do. Can they do it in this window? I mean, even if you love Brock Purdy, is Brock Purdy a good enough quarterback to lead the 49ers as is to and through the playoffs and win the Super Bowl? I'd like to think he is, but I don't know that we can say that definitively. I'm just kind of wondering, does John Lynch, is there any pressure on Lynch? Is there any pressure on Kyle? Or are they already made men in, among the Yorks? If you say to Jed York, John Lynch, or Kyle Shanahan, is he's like, you know what? I love those guys. They've been here for a while. They're going to be here for a long time. They're absolutely not under any pressure to win a Super Bowl. If we do, we do. And if we don't, we don't. Is he that? Is that his standard? Or is his standard, hey, we need that 6 Lombardi and we're going to get it. And these guys have a window to get it done or they're gone. That sounds harsh, but that's kind of reality around the NFL, with at least the teams that set the Super Bowl as their standard. And that's a very few number of teams, right? The Niners, probably the Chiefs, a couple other teams that might be in that mix. Everybody else is looking for just improvement. The 49ers have been to the Super Bowl. They've won it. They got the Lombardis in the trophy case. They judge themselves by Super Bowls, not Super Bowl appearances, but Super Bowl victories. So in a lot of ways, I think John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan would be made men if they did get that Super Bowl. I kind of suspect that if they did win the Super Bowl, that John might leave or kick himself up to president and not have, such a labor intensive, intense, general manager's role and get a little bit more of his family life back. I think he's got goals. I think his goal is to win the Super Bowl. Once he gets that goal done, I don't know that I think Lynch seems too normal. He seems too regular. He seems like a family guy who loves his wife and kids and actually wants to be present. And these NFL people, a lot of times they're present only nominally a lot of the times. And that's the trade-off. These jobs are enormous. The time commitments are huge, absolutely huge. Shanahan, on the other hand, I think is a lifer. I think he's going to coach a long time. But I think he is a made man in San Francisco and could write his own ticket if he wins that 6 Lombardi for Jed. I think Jed loves Shanahan, but I think he's short right now of giving him just the blank check and the open ticket to stay as long as he wants. I think there's still some pressure to win. I'm not saying if they don't win this year, they're fired, but I think there's some pressure to win, to not just make it to the championship game, to make it to the Super Bowl and to win the Super Bowl. So I think Shanahan's a made man if he wins it and stays as long as he wants. I personally think if Lynch finds a way to get that Super Bowl, I think he walks away to back to his family or maybe upstairs to a president's role that's not quite as intense hours wise as a general manager of an NFL franchise. And then the Rodgers thing is interesting. How would the Bay Area respond to Aaron Rodgers? He wore a Joe Montana t-shirt under his pads at Cal. He was like the guy they should have drafted in 1995 and instead, or 2005, I should say. And instead they drafted, Alex Smith. This would be righting that wrong that was made by Mike McCarthy and obviously Mike Nolan was the head coach at the time, but Rodgers is politically is kind of persona non grata among many Bay Area people who have a liberal left leaning. They don't like Aaron Rodgers. So how's that going to play? And then there's an awful lot of people that really have this affinity for Trey Lance. If the Niners give up on Lance, how's that going to play? What would the response be? Would people immediately be like, yeah, great move? Or would there be people that don't like Rodgers and are mad that they moved Lance and would be mad about that deal? There's a lot of different ways to look at it. It definitely seems like Green Bay is at the end of their rope with Aaron. And it definitely seems like the 49ers, with what they said, with what John said yesterday about Trey, he's making, in a way, this all should be perfect, right? You drafted Trey. You love Trey. He's had injuries, but is ready to go and he's already on the field, despite the fact he had a second procedure on that ankle. He's ready to go. And your incumbent starter, at least at the end of the year, Brock Purdy, is still, there's an elbow surgery hanging over him. We don't know how he'll emerge from that surgery. Will he be diminished? Will he lose arm strength? Is he still the player that he was last year? Is the player that we saw last year, is that a good enough player to get him over the top? I think many people, when I talk to them about Trey Lance versus Brock, they're concerned with Brock. They love what they see with Brock, but they're concerned because they feel like maybe he's not high end enough to get it done against Mahomes or Josh Allen or Justin Herbert or Jalen Hurts or the elite quarterbacks in the game. That maybe Brock's the best they got and good, but maybe he's not championship good. So there's people that have their doubts about Brock. So it's just a very interesting situation. I do get the sense, it should have been set up perfectly for Trey. You've got Trey ready to play. You need a starting quarterback, and he's ready to go. And he's been through a couple years of bumps and bruises. He knows your offense. Theoretically, he should know the offense like the back of his hand, and he's ready to play. It shouldn't be a problem. And yet John Lynch hit the podium yesterday, and the first thing he said was about Trey Lance, he's got to play. That's the biggest challenge because we have a team that's ready to go right now. The implication is that Trey, despite the fact he's ready to play, is not ready to start and lead this team to a Super Bowl right now in the estimation of the Niners. Maybe I'm reading into that statement. Maybe that's not what John was saying. I'd love to hear from you guys. Let's hit the chat here. I'll say this. I didn't start that live stream with Jordan Elliott thinking we were going to be talking about an Aaron Rodgers trade to San Francisco, but I think it does make sense on a lot of fronts. If Shanahan doesn't have a blank slate, doesn't have a blank check to just be like, hey, I'm a made man. If he needs that Super Bowl to be a made man in Ninerland, then he needs the quarterback to be healthy and get him over the top. And theoretically, Rodgers could be that guy. Rodgers is a great quarterback by all accounts, but he has not been surrounded by a good enough head coach, good enough weapons, or a good enough defense to get it done. In San Francisco, theoretically, he would be. So, John, Kyle needs Aaron. Aaron needs Kyle. Sounds like the 49ers are preparing us for a Trey Lance trade. Brock, here's the other question. If you get Aaron Rodgers, does that block Brock Purdy? What if Brock Purdy emerges from this elbow injury and plays great? And now you got Aaron Rodgers. And Brock Purdy looks terrific. And he gets out on the field and he looks fantastic. He looks better than he looked last year. And guys in the room are like, we believe in Brock. And the fan base is like, hey, we believe in Brock. And now we're instead watching a declining Aaron Rodgers. How's that going to play? How's that going to all work out? So it's really interesting on a lot of fronts. And then there's the draft for quarterbacks. And I would probably say go into the draft, but I'm looking at things long-term, and maybe Kyle Shanahan is looking at things short-term, and maybe John Lynch is looking at things short-term. And then there's the other thing that I brought up to Jordan, which is, what if Brock is a little diminished? What if Trey is a little improved? I mean, this is, if you wanted to say like what's likely, I think that's probably likely that somehow this elbow injury made him maybe a little less zip on the passes because of it. And maybe Trey, after a year in this offense and a whole off season, is a little bit more up to speed with the offense and a little bit better. So then what? If Brock is a little bit worse and Trey is a little bit better, and you have very similar quarterbacks, isn't that just begging for the locker room to be split? I don't know. There used to be a saying that said, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any. Because in other words, you don't have that one guy. You know, what's the and then you looked at how many teams, I think it was 16 teams in the NFL used 3 different quarterbacks this year. So maybe that's a statement of the past. Maybe that's not a reality-based statement in 2023. Maybe you need multiple quarterbacks to get it done. I don't know. I don't know what the answers are. But I do know this, that I think Trey's an exciting prospect, but in my opinion, long-term. And when I say that, I mean, you could go with Trey this year. I think I'd be shocked if Trey this year could elevate himself into the kind of quarterback that could beat Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes in a Super Bowl, based on what I've seen. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of development that could happen this year. And the light could go on, and, you know, he could have worked on his throwing and have a much better knowledge of the offense. And, you know, there's a lot of factors, but I don't know that the 49ers want to give it even more. I think they want to contend for us. I know they want to contend for a Super Bowl next year. Are they willing to maybe not contend for a Super Bowl for a year to give Trey the ramp up that he needs? I don't see that. I really don't. So when John Lynch came out and said yesterday he's got to play, that's the biggest challenge. We have a team that's ready to go. That sounds to me like we're not giving him away, but if you want him, come and get him, because his timeline doesn't jive with our timeline. That's my takeaway. And then to hear Jordan Elliott throw out the Rodgers thing and to read the stuff about Green Bay, you know, I don't know. Brady's no longer on the table. So it won't be Tom Brady, but Aaron Rodgers could be moved, and the 49ers are looking for a quarterback who can win the Super Bowl next year. Is that Brock? Maybe. Is it Trey? Maybe. Is it Rodgers? I don't know. And what would the price be? You know, what would the price be? And how worried would you be to send Trey to a picture of stability like Green Bay? What if he becomes Brett Favre? Then what? What if it all works out? What if they traded Trey in a deal for Rodgers? Rodgers comes here, wins the 6th Lombardi. Trey goes to Green Bay and becomes Brett Favre, or becomes the next Patrick Mahomes. Then what? Are Niner fans going to be sitting there and saying, yeah, but you know what? We had that Super Bowl. We got that ring. We got that 6th Lombardi. Or would they say Green Bay's won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years with Trey Lance? That was a terrible freaking trade. John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan are idiots. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in a way, you know, we can all kind of envision it. We can envision I could envision Rodgers winning here. I could envision Trey going to Green Bay and having success long-term and winning there. And I could see the fans enjoying the Super Bowl when they won it and roasting the regime when Green Bay starts to win with Lance. Bomber T says, all hypotheticals. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Let's hit the chat, see what people have to say. If you want to jump in, feel free. 49er fan 0223 says trade Trey for an offensive lineman and or a defensive lineman. Scotch says Brady's done, by the way. He's signing with Netflix, but not till next year. What else? Got this one. Hendricks. What if I woke up a millionaire tomorrow? Then you'd have more time to, to watch the Krueg show on YouTube and throw in a super chat every now and then. Eric Hernandez says, or maybe Lance is simply average at best. Then we get to the discussion of why would the 49ers trade Trey Lance? And I think this one is really easy. They would trade Trey Lance if they feel like they know better than others what he is. And if they don't think that they think that his value is higher today than it will be in the future, that's why you would trade Trey Lance. Why wouldn't you trade Trey Lance? It's because you're fearful that his value in the future is going to be considerably higher than what it is in the present. That's why you wouldn't trade him. But if you really were convinced, and Albert Breer had a very interesting revelation that he had talked to Niner people and that they were underwhelmed by both Trey's running ability and his ability as a passer. If that's indeed the case, then you probably do want to move on from Trey. If you're underwhelmed by what he is as a runner and a passer, you've already described him as a dual threat quarterback. So if you don't really feel that either threat is championship worthy or championship caliber, maybe you want to move on. Maybe you do. I don't know. CJ Gray, who's been on before, he says, I think both quarterbacks are far-fetched. He's talking about Derek Carr, I think. CJ says, Carr, too much money. I don't want Derek Carr. I'd rather take a chance with Brock Purdy and Trey Lance than go with Derek Carr. I don't believe in Derek Carr. I don't believe in the competitive fire of Derek Carr. I really don't. I've seen him throw too many balls on fourth down into the turf. Take a chance. Throw it downfield. He's too cautious. To me, Derek Carr is just a 2023 version of what Alex Smith was many of the years he was with the Niners. Talented, has the right size, speed, mental makeup, everything, but just his captain check down. Doesn't want to take hits, doesn't want to take chances. That's the way I see it. We got this one. 49er Josh. Krug, is that the 28-3 shirt from the Super Bowl that Kyle lost? Yes, it is. It's a little faded. But that's my Barstool shirt. I had it on today. Wasn't necessarily planning to do the live stream. Actually, I was planning, if you had watched my live stream last night, we were planning on having Jordan Elliott on today at 4:30 Pacific. And he's like, hey, man, I need to go earlier. So we went earlier. So anyway, I always accommodate my guests. So I wasn't necessarily thinking we were going to do the live stream. I would have put on a nice golf shirt if I thought we were doing the live stream. Instead, I was in a rush. And then I just said, I'll stay with the shirt. Terradome. I like Cooper Rush for the Shanahan system as a second option to Trey if Purdy is out an extended time. All right. I love you, Terradome. I don't agree with you, but I love you. Aussie Rules says Mariota. Maybe he just needs the right system like the Niners. Was I the only person to watch Niners Falcons last year? Mariota was awesome. Mariota was incredible. He was 13 of 14. He completed 93% of his passes. He put so much pressure on the 49ers on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 because his RPO mesh point was hard to decipher. And then his running ability to the edges is legit. And I saw that and I thought, man, if I'm Kyle Shanahan, I'm giving this film to Trey Lance and I'm saying, Trey, this is what I envision. I don't want to run you on quarterback power between the tackles. I want to use your mobility and athleticism to keep our offense on the field by running some RPOs on third and short, holding that mesh point, freezing the defense, and, basically being able to convert on third and fourth down at will, kind of the way that Philly did this year. The one thing that I think the Niners ought to learn from Philly, that rugby scrum short yardage play has to be copied. Absolutely. If you've got a fullback and backup offensive lineman, there's no reason you can't do that. I don't care if it's with Brock. I don't care who you've got at quarterback. If it's Trey, Brock, or a veteran, you can do what Hurts did. And then I really believe in going for it in short yardage a lot. And I really believe in that rugby scrum. And I really believe in using your quarterback on the RPO plays to freeze the defense, hold the mesh point, and then just, they jump at the quarterback, hand it off. They jump at the running back, keep it, and keep your offense on the field and keep continuity to your drives by using the mobility and athleticism of your quarterback. I do think that is the future in a lot of ways of the NFL. The quarterback is unaccounted for sometimes. So you have to be able to use if you're going to have a truly dominant run game, I think you're going to have to utilize that quarterback as a way to, kind of confuse the defense. And those RPO plays, I thought the Niners didn't have a full cast that day in Atlanta, but that Atlanta team behind a good line, but two really ordinary backs. And the Niners just had a hard time getting off the field against Atlanta. And I thought Mariota played spectacularly. Now, he didn't replicate that week after week. Otherwise, he'd still be in Atlanta. I think he had a knee injury in December. That hurt him. But to me, I would go for Marcus Mariota. Now, I would go with Marcus Mariota. And if somebody wants to come calling for Trey, I'd listen. But I wouldn't only do it if it was a great deal. The Rodgers, now why Mariota? Because I still think there's a chance that Brock Purdy has ascended through this ugly offseason. We're talking about his elbow, that he could still improve. And if he improves, maybe you want him starting. So if you go for Aaron Rodgers, Brock will not be starting. If you go for Mariota, Brock has to beat out Mariota. And then you have two starting caliber quarterbacks there, even if you didn't have Trey. Also, I think Trey would be a great, Mariota would be a great template for Trey. And, you've heard Kyle say that he'd like to have quarterbacks that have similar skill sets. You got two quarterbacks right now who have shown some mobility. If you added Mariota, you'd have a third quarterback that had mobility. The other reason I like Mariota is I think that you could pay him a salary that would allow him to be the one if he became the one, the two, or the three. And so you have more flexibility, I think, with Mariota. But the Rodgers thing's intriguing because Rodgers is a superstar and he would elevate the team. There's no doubt in my mind that they could score 30 a game and compete with anybody if they have Aaron Rodgers. So that's interesting. And to me, that's going to be something we talk more about in the days ahead. All right. Joel Martinez says Mariota would also make a good scout team quarterback. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're trying to get over on Kansas City and Buffalo and Philadelphia. You want a scout team quarterback that can at least mock what you may see on Sunday from Jalen Hurts or from Buffalo's quarterback or Mahomes. I mean, Josh Allen or Mahomes. You want that mobility. We got this one from Tobias. He says, what is a good deal for Trey according to you? Well, I've thought about this. To me, a good trade would be a player who was like a day 2 pick and a mid first round pick. And I know a lot of people would say, what, Krueg, you're high. That's way too high. I don't think so. I think the top quarterbacks in this draft are going to all go in the top 10. So if you're Tennessee and you're sitting at 11, you probably can't get a top tier quarterback on a rookie deal. But you could trade that 11th pick and a young player or a pick in a future, maybe a day 3 pick to the 49ers for Trey. And then if you're the Niners, what would you do with that 11th pick overall? There's a lot that you could do. You could go with an offensive tackle, because how often are you going to be picking up that high? You could go with a defensive tackle, or you could go with somebody like a Michael Mayer, who I think's a Gronk. I think Michael Mayer from Notre Dame is one of the best tight ends I've seen come out in the draft in years, and I think he's like a Gronkowski. And if you added a young Gronk to the weapons they have, my God, watch out. Absolutely, I'd love that. Bomber T says, I agree with that. A mid-first rounder and a good player. I think that's fair. You're not going to get what you traded, but I think, if you had a pick anywhere from 12 down to 25 and a young player off the roster that you liked, that would make sense. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you to everybody. If you haven't liked and subscribed, please do. We'll be back later today. Jesse Naylor is going to join us at 7:30 on The Krueg Show, brought to you by Pig and a Pickle.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you won't get exactly what you asked for. Careful, whatever you bring me getting handled. I answer to no one, I don't need to hassle. Yeah.